Okay. Council Town Hall. We're going to be starting now, guys. If you have any questions or comments, we have over there on the left on the forums, on Governance Forum, there's a Council Town Hall questions and comments. I'm monitoring that. So if you guys want to post anything in there, I'll make sure those questions get answered at some point. But we kind of have an agenda already with the council, and they'll be going over that. And this is kind of a governance V2 focused town hall. So if you have questions related to that, feel free to ask in that chat. And like I said, I'll be monitoring that as we go. And feel free to raise your hands, and I'll try and get through you guys as we can, or you can type your questions and I'll just answer them as we go. So yeah, we can get started though. I'm not sure who's starting, Annie or Blichter?
Yeah, I think I'll go ahead and kick it off. Thank you, Rich, for the intro. And again, thank you to everyone who's joining us today. As mentioned, we're going to be really focusing in a pretty deep dive on GovV2 for this town hall. So that's where we like to spend our time. We do recognize there's a number of other topics, IIP, ICCP activity over the past month or so that also bears discussion. And so we are happy to go over that. Our plan is just in a couple weeks or so, we'll have another town hall and talk through more kind of general state of the project and other topics. But really, given the interest and number of points that have come up in GovV2, we thought it made sense to jump in with this as that was dropped just before the Christmas holiday in December. So the first thing that I want to cover, and this is going to be a little bit of an overview that I give in a main general update for the community, just to start for V2. But then we're going to pass it off, and I'll have Blichter and Daraji each hop in, and they're going to do some, I think, interesting sharing on a couple of the key community pieces of feedback that we've received on the first draft of GovV2 that has been incorporated now into version 0.2 of that document. So for starters, I know a number of you have been on AMAs, been in other discussions on the forum on why we need GovV2, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, both as the council and the community and the team, there are primarily three reasons why we've introduced GovV2. The first one is to really recognize our shift that is necessary in 2023 from what's primarily a DeFi project to a GameFi project. And what I mean by that is we, of course, have been building for the better part of a couple of years now into a series of different gaming titles. But thus far, we haven't really had gameplay out until more recently. I know we've had the arena, the first and second versions of it out since last summer, but really, until we get to the point where there's actual live gameplay that's out, we primarily have been driven as a financial protocol. And so the shift here, to a large degree, is focusing on making sure that we get appropriate channels and processes in place to address gaming topics as well as the financial topics, the marketing, the community topics that are going to be coming up as part of this transition into a gaming community from a primarily finance-focused community. The second reason that we need V2 is increased decentralization. And I'm going to say, even if this means some additional costs to the DAO, and when I say costs, I do mean financial costs potentially, but also costs in terms of efficiency and speed. And so we recognize that while GovV2 produces a lot of great advantages, one disadvantage is that it will be a little bit slower for changes to be implemented, depending on the topic, because there's going to be more councils to work through. We believe that we have good processes in place to minimize that. However, really important for our success as a project is that we are and continue to be recognized as a DAO. And what that means is the more individuals that we have engaged, both from the community in voting, in governance discussions, in IAP and ICCP creation, as well as the more people that are working within the team that are in and operating in DAO activities, the better off we are from a decentralization standpoint. This has been very clear over the past 6 months or so as regulators from a number of different jurisdictions are looking at DAO structures. If you can very clearly prove that you are a highly decentralized organization, you are much less at risk as an organization of being found in jeopardy of topics that we like to avoid. And so making sure that we're as decentralized as possible is the second key element. And the third one is really getting the best talent from across the DAO into the most effective roles where they can produce the best value for the project. And so you see in the framework a pretty heavy focus on specialization of topics, of the skill sets of individuals, and the various chains and channels where IAPs and ICCPs would flow through. This is all focused on making sure that we are getting the most out of the community, out of the council members, and out of the structure. So those are the three elements that are really underpinning the reason why we're moving towards GovV2. A couple caveats to this approach in general. The first one, and I know we've said it, I think you all will recognize after we talk through some of the details today, this is still very much a work in progress. It has had literally dozens of hands and ideas already brought to it from across the community. It will continue to do so. We're going to talk through two key elements that the community has raised that have already been incorporated into the version, and we recognize that there will be more to come. Also, as just a general disclaimer, some of the guidance that we are still waiting on for regulation looking into the future, we anticipate to be coming, and we will, of course, incorporate that along with the community feedback and topics that we see that we need. And so I would encourage the community, please keep your feedback and the discussion coming because it is continuing to be incorporated on a step-by-step basis within the IAP to give us the best possible framework. Also, we recognize that this is GovV2, which means there will probably be a GovV 2.1 and at some point a GovV 3. And so we don't have to get everything perfect this time, but we want to make sure that we are markedly better. And frankly, from an industry standpoint, that we are leading the way across the sector as far as gaming DAOs. And I really believe that we are, as I look across other projects, we get a lot of feedback on what we're doing, that we're really setting the tone and the trend for this approach across the industry. So those are a few of the general disclaimers I wanted to note. Moving to the content and what does V2 actually include? I think a lot of you have seen the proposal. If not, please feel free to go out and check it out. You can even follow along through some of the discussion as we talk today. Linked under the IAP ICCP forum, there's a GovV2 updated version out there. So you can follow along as we talk through some of the elements. Would probably be good if you haven't to at least just bookmark that and go back and check it out. It is, fair warning, it's a pretty extensive document. It's 28 pages. And again, very comprehensive, trying to address a number of topics. So from a high level standpoint, the primary change that we're implementing is shifting from a single council. As we all know, the Illuvinati Council today, 4 of the 5 members of that, plus Kieran, are on that council, will be splitting up into 5 sub-councils, plus 1 additional semi-independent but still integrated board that would be responding to and implementing and voting on all changes in the DAO in the future. And so for those that are following along, if you go to page 11 of the document, there's a really nice graphic that the team has put together that really explains how this would work. So I encourage you to reference that if you haven't seen the overview. But basically, there would still be a single main council that exists, but instead of the community voting on the council members for that main council, they would be voting on council members for 4 sub-councils. And those sub-councils, the first one is focused on the community, and this is really the starting point for all IAPs, where any IAP or ICCP that's being proposed by any individual, whether they're a council member, a team member, a core contributor, a community member, they would all start and roll through the community sub-council. The point of this group is to identify community sentiment, talk through the potential of the particular IAP, discuss and identify any potential risk points, and then pass along that guidance to one of what I'm going to call the specialized subcouncils. So the second tier of subcouncils that are more specialized are marketing, game, and strategy. And I won't get into details on the specific scope for each one of those. You can see some really good examples of kind of where the lines are drawn between those three subcouncils. If this is a topic that's of interest to the community, some of you can let us know, and we're happy to talk through what that looks like as far as the difference. But functionally, we tried to split up the scope so that it's roughly equivalent between the three subcouncils, while being a coherent piece of content. And that also allows us to get individuals into those subcouncils that are able to be specialized through either their experience, their work, their work history, their educational backgrounds, into those different areas. So someone who is a professional gamer or who has worked on game development in the past might move into the game subcouncil, right? Someone who has done business development and strategy and financial focused roles, executive functions, might move on to the strategy subcouncil. And similarly for marketing, we would be looking for individuals that have a really good pulse on the community, on the broader Web3 ecosystem, our potential partners within both the infrastructure space, marketing space, and other GameFi projects that we might want to be involved with. So all of those subcouncils are really intended to be specialized and focused on individual elements, and they would be bringing both external market viewpoints into the discussion for IAPs, as well as their own knowledge. And so each IAP, ICCP would flow from the community subcouncil to one of those three subcouncils, based on what's the primary scope of the change. After the voting is done there, it would then move to the main council for a final vote on the changes. The main council then is going to be comprised of members from each of those four subcouncils, plus one overall team admin. And this team admin would be someone who is determined from the team that would sit on that main council. And at each point, we want to ensure that there's a strong integration between the team and the community. And so in each of those sub-councils, you see it, whether it's the main council or the sub ones, there's a 4-to-1 ratio that's proposed, 4 community members, 1 team member that would be selected. And that ensures that for any change, it's going to be pretty quick to get feedback into the sub-council or the main council based on overall costs, overall development timelines, feasibility of particular changes, so that we have both the ability to come up with good ideas, and also we're sure that we can implement them effectively as they're being voted on. And so those are a couple of the key changes to the council structure that really form the basis of GovV2. There's a number of other topics I'm not going to hit on in too much detail. Compensation structures are still in discussion. We do envision a reduction in compensation on a per member basis, partly because we expect having more members working on the topics should defray a little bit the amount of time that council members are spending on the individual topics. But also from a cost standpoint, there of course is still a cost to the DAO if we're implementing an additional 20 or so individuals that would be making up these councils compared to the 5 that we have today. And so we want to make sure that we're striking the right balance between attracting and retaining the right talent onto these councils, as well as ensuring that we're being good stewards of the finances of the DAO.
Hey, Annie, I just wanted to butt in 1 second while you're going. I know it's a lot of information, everyone. So I just wanted to keep you in the loop one more time. So if you look over under governance and you see IIP ICCP forum, so there's a new title in there, governance V2 updated. So you can follow along there. There's a Google Doc in there that's labeled version 2, I think, or version. Yeah, I think I just updated it as version 0.2. So you could follow along with what Annie's talking about in there, or read at your own leisure. It's a very long document, like he said, but he's kind of giving you the TLDR on it now. And then just below that forum is the governance forum. And in there, there's the council town hall questions. So if you guys have any questions you want clarity on at some point, just raise your hand or type it in there and we'll get it addressed at some point. I'm monitoring that chat. So just, I know it's a lot, you guys. So yeah, just if you have questions, feel free to ask. And like I said, you can follow along in that Google Doc. Go ahead, Annie.
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I think it's a good point. Probably no one in the world knows how lot it is compared to you, given your role in helping us craft this. So yeah, thank you for that update. So again, just kind of coming back to the other key points in the document, talked about council pay. The nomination and voting process are fairly straightforward and not that different from the current structure today. I think the main change point here is that each council would be voted on at the same time period as we're approaching a new epoch. And so nominees that are interested in putting themselves forward for a specific subcouncil are going to be required to indicate which of the four they are interested in. As the voting is done from the community and the subcouncils are formed, each subcouncil will then vote internally to send one representative from those subcouncils to the main council. So the main council is comprised, again, of the team admin, but then one representative from each of the subcouncils, ensuring that we have good cross-pollination of knowledge and consideration of topics that could affect any one of the areas of the project in those final main council votes. The voting process, again, is fairly straightforward and similar to what we have today, but obviously, as mentioned, it would flow through each of the subcouncils. And we do have a fair bit of effort that has been put into really detailing more of the roles, the expectations for council members, both whether that's from an ethical standpoint, from a responsibilities, a timing, voting, feedback, IAP standpoint, and so on. And so you can go through all of that content again at your leisure. I and the council members up here are happy to answer questions on any of those points that you might have in just a few minutes here. And then to the two elements that I wanted to highlight, and I'm going to turn it over to first Blichter and then to Daraji. The main changes that we've made from the very first version 0.0 of this document through now are the vote of no confidence and the emergency proposal process. And so again, just to also make sure that we're keeping the community appraised that V2 wasn't finished when it was rolled out. We're very seriously taking into account the community feedback. We think that both of these topics really address some critical issues. One about council members who may not be fulfilling their duties appropriately, or with the support of the community, as well as the need at some situations for an emergency process where we may need to react more quickly to issues that have arisen across the project. And so with that said, I'm going to turn over to Blichter for a detailed discussion on the vote of no confidence changes.
Perfect. Thanks, Annie. It was a fantastic summary of kind of how GovV2 works. I'll be talking about the vote of no confidence. It's one of the structures that we changed from the original version of Governance V2 based on community feedback and some other guidance we received. I'll be talking about the motive and the structure for votes of no confidence. If you are following along in the document, this section can be found in Appendix A4. So to start off with, the motive for changing votes of no confidence to the current structure, there's been concerns voiced with regard to the community not having recourse to deal with a council member who isn't fulfilling the expectations of either the community or the expectations of the role that they're filling. Some examples of things like this would be a council member not voting or a council member not providing reasoning for their votes, missing meetings, or just generally not communicating or being present within their role. as council duties are associated with a stipend, and that stipend is paid by the DAO, it does make sense for the DAO to have a form of recourse to remove a council member who's not performing their duties. So that's sort of the core of the motivation behind this structure for votes of no confidence. It allows both the council and the community means to vote a council member out. With that said, I'll talk through the process and what that sort of looks like. So at the start of a vote of no confidence, it always starts with information sharing. So this can be started either by the community, in which case information would be shared publicly in a proposal for a vote of no confidence against the accused council member. If the initiation starts within the council, on the other hand, the information would be first shared privately with the IMC by a sub-council who has a concern with one of their members. If the events are serious enough for a vote to begin, the IMC would make that information public and initiate a vote. As the second step, the accused council member can make a statement in their defense. That would be done in the same Discord thread where the initial information related to the vote of no confidence was shared. Thirdly, the IMC or the community can initiate a vote of no confidence. If the community is initiating a vote of no confidence, it would require the support of 50 ILV holders or stakers. In the event of an IMC initiation, it would require a majority vote by the IMC in favor of the vote of no confidence. The actual voting process for the vote of no confidence is the same regardless of where the vote was initiated. So whether it's started by the community or by the IMC, this part of the process is the same. And in line with keeping things decentralized, this section would go to ILV stakers who would vote using sort of the normal election calculated VILV weighting. So yeah, basically VILV calculated quadratically. If a majority by VILV count is in favor of the motion to remove the council member, they would be removed, and they would also not receive any outstanding payment for the epoch. There is a process in place to replace the accused council member if there are more than 60 days remaining in the epoch. If there are less than 60 days, the sub-council that was affected would continue on with 4 members. But the core of this replacement process is that the next voted person who didn't make it on the council would be taking that spot. You can read through the specifics of additional redundancy in the proposal itself. To bring it back to sort of why this matters, the idea here is to protect the DAO from council members acting in bad faith with a meaningful form of recourse that applies in the event that, for example, an entire council isn't acting in alignment with ILV holders' interests in mind. As far as how this works on a practical level, we sort of envision this as the IMC would be ideally the first to act to remove a council member that's not performing their duties. This kind of makes sense because sub-councils would have greater visibility on a sub-council member who's not performing their duties. But in the event that that doesn't work, or in the event that a sub-council doesn't seem to be acting with ILV holders' interests in mind, ILV holders and stakers could initiate a vote independently and effectively remove any sub-council member. So, yeah, we do believe that this creates a strong and decentralized method of getting rid of council members who are not performing their duties. We can answer questions on this if there are any afterwards, but I think for now I'll pass this over to Daraji to talk about emergency proposal processes.
And I just wanted to say one thing before we continue. We did ask, while we're on the subject of council members not doing their duties, we asked Kieran not to specifically be here because sometimes chats can get derailed when Kieran is here answering questions because he's, internal and he's part of the council. So we specifically requested that he not be here so that we could focus on the governance V2 topics. And Kieran gave us his questions ahead of time, or like, you know, his comments and his feedback ahead of time on governance V2, just so everyone's aware that that's why he's not here. We requested that specifically. So, Daraji, yeah, you can continue.
So the next major addition that we have, again, tied to community feedback, but something that we were thinking about as well, is what if something disastrously goes wrong and we have just built in this feedback mechanism of multiple layers, but we need to take action quickly. And so we added the emergency proposal process. It's Appendix 6, which is page 24, I believe, here. Yeah. So if you want to follow along. Before I get into kind of the details around what this involves and the flowchart that we've envisioned for your feedback, this is perfect timing because it's almost a year to the day of the exploit in SILV, which required the team to take action very quickly to kind of stop that unlimited minting that we saw, which is why we implemented the staking V2 and why there's the pause in rewards at the moment. So I think that's a perfect example of a situation where this would need to be applied. The other spot that I'll kind of highlight that where this follows from what Blichter just shared is if the council is acting in a way to apply this when they shouldn't, the community has the recourse to vote out any number of council members. And so we really do view the emergency proposal process being something that requires immediate action, and if not, there's just lasting or completely detrimental financial, reputational, or legal implications that require that action. And if it is taken when it shouldn't be, it's on the community to be able to vote out those members. So with that, kind of jump into what the process is. And like I said, the bulk of the time, we do want it to flow through the system that Annie laid out, where it's an idea from anywhere, goes through the community, goes to a sub-council, goes to the IMC to approve. Certain instances, like there is not enough time to be able to do that and avoid a major issue. And so there's a bug, there's something that's called out that can be identified by either a team member or a community member. And I'm now on the flowchart, which is on 27. So depending on who acknowledges what this issue is, the first thing is report it to appropriate members, and particularly the governance community manager, the GCM, to gather the right folks together. If the individual is a team member, obviously they're going to know who the right technical folks are to start assembling solutions. If it's a community member, they can highlight it in Discord and make sure that they're tagging the appropriate folks. We do want to caution, if this is an exploit, we want to minimize the folks that kind of are aware of this until we can take action. And so there are some confidentiality things in there. Certainly, there's also the bug reporting and bug bounty program that community members can take advantage of if they identify something. But from there, we really want to gather the right folks, and it really takes on two unique work streams. And so one is the technical team to be able to identify solutions. The second is getting the IMC on board very quickly with potentially the Treasury Committee to meet and discuss what needs to be implemented. The ideas are brought back from the technical team to the IMC, and then to expedite the process, a verbal vote would be taken. And so we don't want to wait the 3-day, everybody get their wallets out and have to vote if it is something that requires absolute urgency, but be able to pass that quickly. This does implement a new thing that we need to make sure that anybody that serves on the IMC is aware of, and there needs to be a way to get in contact with you in the case of an emergency. And so that's going to be another expectation to serve on that highest council, that you may be called upon to get on a video or conference call very quickly to discuss and provide direction. Once that verbal vote is taken, the team then goes about implementing whatever the solution is. Direction is given by the council. once the resolution is confirmed, it goes back to say, hey, we have resolved this issue. And at that stage, it goes to the IMC and the team to figure out how do we appropriately communicate this back and make sure that that vote is documented appropriately. So that's the crux of the process. Again, this is not meant to be taken lightly, but where there is something that is seriously detrimental to the DAO, we need to have a process in place to be able to address it quickly. And hopefully this is something that the community agrees with this process.
I think we at least have. Are we to the point of asking questions, or does Scoriox have something to continue with?
I think I'll just jump in. I'll make this really, really brief, but like obviously this is still a working document. We'd like to have it implemented as soon as possible, but there is always room for more feedback, and we'll keep going with that. So there are a few really key areas, and we explain them all quite thoroughly between Blichter, Deraji, and Annie, of course. But I wanted to make it a little bit more explicit of kind of like the areas that in particular that we're looking for feedback. So firstly, on the vote of no confidence. Previously, the vote of no confidence was quite obscure, and we're hoping that this new system is a lot easier to understand. It makes a lot more sense, and it's a lot more structured. But if there's anything you guys think could be implemented or fixed, or if there's some areas where it's a little bit too easy to vote out a council member, because we definitely don't want it to be too easy, and we definitely don't want it to be too hard. So we always appreciate any comments on that. Probably one of the bigger discussions is the elected versus appointed council members. Team members, sorry. So on each sub-community, or the three in particular, there is currently the structure is 1 team member and 4 elected community members. And there's a big discussion currently internally in the council, and I think quite a bit in the GovV2 in Discord as well, is that should the team member be appointed, and should we have 2 or 1 team members? And this is definitely an ongoing discussion. I know everyone on the council is a little bit split. I think we're mostly good with 4 to 1. But the idea of appointing or not, or electing them, is certainly a discussion. The other side of it is the technical limitations that we currently have with Snapshot. Whereas as Snapshot evolves and improves, or we build our own system, then this will obviously this entire discussion will definitely change. But currently, we're trying to figure out if we need to make sure it's as decentralized as possible, which would mean electing a team member, which means multiple team members could run, but they'd have to be in the same vote as well. So the way that that's structured inside Snapshot is its own beast. But yeah, so the ideas behind that, and what might be best for the DAO, or just best in general, and what would give us the best possible sub-council in each given case, is either appointed or elected. Appointed, yeah, or elected by the community. So the other one that we're looking for feedback on is the emergency proposal process, and Deraji just outlined that one for you, and yeah, it's a lot to take in. Even I have a little bit of trouble going through it sometimes, so read through it a few times, and there's a lot in there, but really protecting the DAO is number one priority. But we want to make sure that we're decentralized. That there's been some concerns that if we don't decentralize fully and separate as much as we can from the eDAO, and like dissolve the eDAO, then we might open ourselves up to regulatory fire, since technically the eDAO would have full control over things, because they could just make a proposal and have it go through and things like that. So any advice regarding to that, to make sure that we can both protect the DAO as well as not restrict them too much, because I mean, if things are urgent, as Deraji already cleared up with the SILV issue, then yeah, we're always looking for feedback on these 3 topics in particular, but everything in the governance doc. And I hope you guys all read through V0.2. I know it's a big document, but we're excited to see all your feedback, and the discussion on the initial document was all really, really good. We all went through and read through all of it. We had lots of internal discussions as well about what was being said, and we included all the feedback inside our document. So that's one of the best parts about this entire governance process, is implementing what you guys think and want, and working on this entire thing as a big team.
All right.
Yep. I think with that said, we can probably move to some community questions.
I think let's move into the ones that were pre-written already.
Yeah, I'll just answer
blockchain
Artemis real
positivity.
quick. And
Yep.
Artemis, yes, it's being recorded, and I'll post it on Illuvium Plus, the secondary YouTube channel that me and TSG were using. So yes, it'll be posted and it's recorded on there. So you're all good. So as far as questions go, yes, positivity. He's not here, so we can probably answer one of his questions first. He said, how much of an impact will the new gaming council have on the PvP experience? It's in development now, but we haven't heard much about it. As an investor, it's my main thesis for a successful studio that the PvP is fun and engaging, and would be nice to hear the parameters that this sub-council can decide on.
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump in and give my thoughts. It's a really good question, and it's in my mind one of the most critical balances that we have to strike between the role of, in this case, the gaming subcouncil especially, and the team. And so one really critical point that I want to highlight for everyone is it's never a good approach to do game design by committee. Certainly, a good game takes quite a number of talented individuals, each working together in their functional areas. So I don't mean that we shouldn't have multiple people involved, but really doing structural lore, core game mechanics via community sentiment and council feedback is not what's intended with the gaming subcouncil. It is important, and critically so, that in Web3 we have much better processes in place for hearing the feedback from the community and taking it into account on the team and on the dev side, right? And this is why a lot of us, I think, are here in the space, because we see the potential of having a much more closely aligned community development team, gamers, and so forth. And so in my mind, the key point of the game subcouncil is to take the community feedback. There will be IAPs on everything from topics like the Spider IAP and developing additional content for the future, additional game modes, additional balance issues, and quality of life improvements, and so forth. All of those topics are going to be fair points to bring up and potentially write IAPs for. The key there, though, is we want the subcouncil to stay away from trying to make design decisions as opposed to giving more general direction of prioritization and key topics and points of interest from the community for the development team to then do what they do best, which is develop an engaging and sustainable game system. So that's kind of my take on the philosophical approach as well as practically how it should work. And I'll turn it over to any of the other council members that want to chime in here.
Yeah, I largely agree with most of what you said. Some level of seeing how things operate, and then revising on the structures that are in place. We're basically building out the framework for how this can work, but there will be an element of the individual subcouncils having to iterate on their own processes and decide what areas they want to be involved in. That should be done in consultation with the team member sitting on each subcouncil. And so in some regard, I think this is something that's going to need to be revisited once this structure's in place, if that makes sense.
Sorry, rugged myself, guys. Okay, so we're all good with that then? You guys covered that? I accidentally clicked on another.
Yeah, I think we can jump on to some of the next questions.
Botch had a question. One recent illuminating message from Blichter was how he saw the difference between the DAO and Illuvium Labs. Could the council members state how they see the difference?
I can start if you want. I don't know if the other council members see it sort of similar to me, but Illuvium Labs is essentially the development team and the team that creates the game essentially. And I feel like that is quite separate from the council in itself. The big difference between the DAO and this Illuvium Labs is that the DAO is more about the governing body for decisions, especially as it pertains to ILV holders and stakers, as well as the early investors. And they make a lot of the financial as well as the overarching decisions for the labs, Illuvium Labs, the direction of Illuvium Labs, right? That's pretty much how I see the difference, to be honest.
Yeah, in the current implementation of the way things are working, that fundamentally is how things are operating right now. But again, I'll reiterate something that Annie mentioned earlier, that this is still evolving. We're still getting feedback on this, and so it is entirely possible that those structures could change.
Yeah, I think the goal really is to have both the DAO and the Illuvium Labs organization working in harmony, and in, I would say, not just game development, but also in like the marketing space and some others. Most key execution topics, let's say, have been allocated and given to the Illuvium Labs team to implement from the DAO, right? And so I tend to just, in a simplified version, think of the DAO as strategy, core decision making, steering type of function, and then the doing, the implementation lands with Illuvium Labs. As has been mentioned, there's certainly going to be governance structure changes that impact the DAO a lot with V2 here. And there also may be, and I anticipate there probably should be, some structural changes that would come up in the next months and or years, especially again as we look at things like regulatory clarity that will be coming at some point in the future, as we look at the game launches and how we need to evolve as an organization. But that's kind of my simplified version of the roles of those two organizations.
Anybody else? Taraji? Torios? Are you
See, I think you can see within the governance V2 structure the role that the community and the DAO plays of being the directive organization and then contracting that work effectively through folks to implement it. And not every decision has to go from a council, but high level at every aspect of what the DAO is getting into between gaming, marketing, and then strategy. We want it to be largely driven by the community, which is the 4-1 structure that you're seeing on how that team is composed at each level.
Yeah, personally, I'm not on the council. I'm just I'm part of the discussions and everything. But yes, I think going forward, I think the more decentralized vision we have, the better. Like I think certain things needed to start off a certain way, but as far as game development and starting that stuff. But I think the community's gotten to a great place, and we have great council members in here, and we have great community members that are contributing to governance now. I think honestly, like the decentralization at this point is only going to make us stronger. So. But we can move on to another question. I think Botch had a second part of his question. What are the ideas that should go through IIP, and what type of things should not? And what should Illuvium Labs have autonomy with? So essentially, what should Illuvium Labs be able to decide on their own versus what we're putting through IIPs to the community?
First here, because this is actually something that I'm working on for probably the next iteration of Governance V2, and it comes from the Spider IIP. I think that was a great test of the system, But as we get into what it takes to go through community review, the sub council review, and then potentially up to the IMC, there's certain things that don't necessarily need that level of rigor and oversight. And something else that came up in the discussions of the Spider IIP is like, well, what if somebody comes up with another list of 50 different things that are all voted on individually as the next Illuvatars? Like, well, at a certain point, it becomes overwhelming. And so that's where I think there is a lower level of proposal that's not a full IIP that has to go through the entire process, but potentially is handled by one of the sub councils in itself. And so Spider, to me, could be resolved at the gaming council level, and they would have oversight to say, okay, how many potential new characters can we build into the next round? How do we prioritize it? And so there you have the right discussion among individuals that have the right information, and it's potentially stopped and gets implemented at that phase. It's not defined yet. It's something that I'm working on and would love community feedback on. But that's how I see it, of having multiple different levels based on complexity or the number of sub-councils that are potentially impacted by the decision.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I completely agree with that approach by Taraji. I do think that a lot of these sort of special cases that may not need to go all the way to the IMC as proposals, those are things that need to be identified and discussed explicitly with team members who are familiar with the process for, say, like character design, game design. I do see it as sort of a lower level of proposal, maybe called like suggestion proposals or something of that nature, that can be expedited by sub councils individually instead of going through necessarily like the entirety of the process. I do still think that anything that makes it to a specialized sub council level should still be going through community review. I think that's an incredibly important part of the governance structure, both in terms of making sure that sub councils are engaged with the community and are clearly explaining the intent of their proposals. But I also think it's important that the community be heard when they draft a proposal that stands alone. So,
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I feel like that since we discussed before with the council being more of a steering the ship kind of a thing, it allows people like the gaming sub council to make a more overarching decision in this sense. So, for example, if we have these expedited systems where you can get small proposals for individual Illuvials and things like that, the gaming council will have would have the ability to also write an IIP that goes through the overall process. That's something like only 20 Illuvials will be let in from the community for this next batch and things like that. And having the team member on there and direct links to all those systems will definitely be a big help with that. But they'll be able to direct that conversation without, kind of slowing down the entire system. So I think, yeah, it works quite well.
Yeah, and I'll hit on maybe a key macro point that we're kind of glossing over at the moment when when we give an overview for the structure, and it's this, that each of the specialized sub councils should be operating in very different ways, right? On paper, they're structured the same in terms of number of council members. They're voted on generally the same. The gaming sub council has some nuance to it. And the IAPs and ICCPs get to them in the same way, but fundamentally, a gaming sub council that's taking community feedback on individual, again, balance, gameplay, mechanics, expansionary topics, all of these discussions should be behaving and steering their topics very differently than a strategic group that's looking at financial changes to the DeFi arm of the DAO, and or macro market condition topics, and or ecosystem balance points, future product expansions and launches, and so on. Those are very, very different functional bodies. And so it's important for us to recognize that the specific way that each of those subcouncils is behaving should be more nuanced to the types of topics that they're actually having come into them from an IAP ICCP standpoint, and how they interact with the team is also going to look differently. And so making sure that we give that flexibility and autonomy to each of those subcouncils to determine the best way in which they need to act is really essential. And for sure, ideally we'll have some continuity epoch to epoch, and some process stability. But essentially, we don't want to really overly dictate what that needs to look like for each subcouncil. So with that said, I think those are the questions that I see at the moment in the chat. Maybe Rich, we should ask if anyone wants to raise their hand and hop up on stage.
Yeah, if any of you guys want to voice your questions or type them in. Otherwise, I know it's a very thorough and long document, so if you have any specific questions that they can answer, we'll get them answered now. Otherwise, like I said, that document's linked under IIP ICCP forum, and this is all recorded, so you can think about it and ask your questions there later. But yeah, if you have a question now, feel free to raise your hand. Oh, we got Thalky. Thalky, how you doing?
Good. Hey guys, do you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, yes. Sorry, I'm a bit mobile. Yeah, first, I have to read it a couple more times right now, but it looks nice. Awesome job from all the council members. Looks like a good read. So I just got a quick 2 questions out of the top of my head. One of it was like, I know we're waiting for some legal experts' opinion sometime on V1 before it was released. I wanted to know if it was is it possible to share most, some, or not any of that feedback that you guys got. And the second one, and don't hate me, but is there like an estimate timeline for like GovV2 feedback, and then like when would it be put to a vote? Sorry for the when question. It doesn't have to be specific date, but like kind of like a broad, thought of it. If you can, that's it.
I mean, I'll just say one thing in like as regards to like obviously I'm not the one voting on it, but I mean like in regards to like the support we got of the document the way it is, I think a lot of people were pretty happy with the way it is, and I think at this point, the council's taking in feedback and implementing feedback we think is good, or however it whatever improves it, because it's always can be improved to some degree. So like I'll say that much, like I don't think it's anything that needs to be rushed. Like technically we could vote on it right now, right? But I think that council is taking their time and reviewing feedback and gathering the best feedback possible, and then doing what's best for the DAO.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I'll jump in on both of these. Most of the guidance we've received so far has been high-level guidance. It hasn't been specific, nitty-gritty details about the proposal. But honestly, it can be summarized by aiming for a more decentralized structure. That's been the overarching guidance we've received, and you can see that a lot of the changes sort of reflect that. With regards to when, governance V2 frankly, it's a massive change to the way that things operate currently. And we need to make sure that the bones of it are correct. We need to make sure that we have redundancies in. We need to make sure that all of the pieces fit together well and make sense. And so that is a process that just inherently takes time, especially as we're incorporating more changes to pursue that decentralized ethos. Every time something changes, we need to review the document in its entirety and make sure that that piece fits into the whole structure. So, no real firm answer on when. Obviously, sooner is better, but at the same time, this needs to be correct. Like, I don't think it's worth sacrificing quality for speed in this case.
I will say that we are still, Kieran and the legal counsel and stuff are still discussing this document over the next however long they need to figure out kind of where it fits into not just our regulatory systems over in Australia, but in other parts of the world as well. So that there are things at play there that we don't really have all the answers for you on, and I don't know how much that will impact the time it takes to implement GovV2. I know that on the council we're pretty unanimous that we would like it to be implemented as quickly as we can make it, but without obviously rushing it and doing a poor job, right?
Yeah, and I'll add maybe a couple points. In terms of the timing, I hope it's been transparent through just this town hall that our approach is, I would say, very systemic in how we're trying to take the community feedback. So we got a number of pieces of feedback, for instance, that got rolled into this vote of no confidence process. And that includes things like docking of council pay for missed votes. It includes a removal of council members. So multiple items we're trying to combine into a single topic. And I think the way you're going to see us move forward is each subsequent version of this document, you'll see those individual elements getting firmed up as we have the community feedback, as we have discussions within the council, with the community, with the team. All of those points we want to kind of lock down on individual elements until we're comfortable that we've got at least all of the core points very much in place. As Skoriax alluded to, the next important step is that we will likely be having to build some systems and solutions, to say nothing of the process changes, to enable GovV2. And so there will be some development time after this is confirmed before we would be able to be fully live, right? And so the question of how extensive is that, to some degree is dictated by the overall structure that we put in place. But that development cycle that would be necessary, whether we do it in-house or it's an outsourced approach or whatever, plus, of course, then the kickoff for subsequent epoch and nominations and voting process and so on. And that means that the entire process is still going to take several months. But this is why I think myself, the other council members, we've really pushed a lot over the past couple months here to ensure that we could get this out as quickly as possible and really begin the feedback process so that the turnaround time is ideally done before this epoch is ending, right? And so that for me is sort of a targeted backstop that before we have the next set of council elections, that we're doing that for GovV2. And if we can do it as early as possible, where the solutions are robust from a technical standpoint and the processes we're confident are not going to fail, it should be our goal as a community and as a council to get this through.
Well, awesome. That's it for me. Cheers. No worries. No need to rush anything. Just wanted to ask. Awesome guy. Awesome job again, guys.
Thank you, Talkie. Anybody else got any questions you want to get up here and ask? I don't see any more.
I have to get going, unfortunately.
Oh, you gotta go?
Yeah, unfortunately.
All right,
I'll drop in a minute.
Artemis,
thank you everyone for joining, by the way. I really appreciate everyone coming by, and I'll watch the end of the recording, obviously. But thanks everyone for stopping by, and all the feedback's been really positive, and I'm actually quite happy to see that there isn't too many more questions, which is not necessarily a good thing, but at the same time it means that we did a pretty decent job answering all the feedback and stuff when having the discussion. So yeah, just wanted to say I'm really glad for that.
Hey, we got a question.
Hello.
Josh.
Quickly before you leave, I appreciate your time, Skoriax. Hopefully you can stay for this. I had a question revolving around some of the communication for the sub-council. Are you planning to just do everything through the IMC? So planning to just have, the lead council member from each sub-council just discuss interdepartment kind of crossover, because with so much crossover potential, I can just see a lot of conversations happening that you're going to have to essentially have strat meetings, and that's maybe what you're thinking with the IMC. But I imagine, obviously, with the kind of the way it's laid out at the minute, and what I can see is obviously crossover happening. Certain council members won't be available at certain times, and they'll obviously take on that kind of meeting role. And then you're going to have to have a catch up internally within the independent sub council. You know, maybe that's not possible because of time zones and whatever else. Would you plan to have, like, before you have a IMC meeting, would you plan to have a strat meeting within each sub council to just discuss changes? Is there anything that's happened, you know, that we need covering before we have a IMC meeting, that sort of thing?
I might not be understanding your question quite much, but kind of this is how I see it going down, and that's mostly that the structure is held as the structure is currently retained in GovV2, right? So all the sub-councils have their own meetings within themselves, and a big element of this structure is that one member from each sub-council is elected into the IMC, right? So the idea is that that person will be, and the compensation reflects this, that person will be bringing all those meeting notes, bringing all that discussion points and things like that, and bringing that up to the IMC when those discussions need to evolve into the IMC and be shown to everyone else that's involved. And this keeps it a little bit separated, but it also makes communication far more streamlined, and it also makes it easier to communicate the summed down version of a sub-council's thoughts, especially as it pertains to their individual meetings. So I see pretty much all the sub-councils having their own individual meetings. If everyone, let's say the 20 people or whatever, get together for one large meeting, then that might be like every quarter or something like that, or as part of the onboarding process that we'll start to define in these months as well. But
so that's not quite what I meant. I didn't mean get everybody together, but I was expecting, you know, if, for example, strategy is going to have some crossover with marketing, potentially, or something that the game wants to do might have some crossover with marketing or strategy, you're going to get these like bleed-throughs, interdepartmental bleed-throughs at times. And instead of like not talking to the people and seeing this sort of stuff, I imagine you guys are going to have these kinds of conversations cross department, as essentially. So I was basically asking if you were just going to have like a strat meeting in the sub council itself before you went into an IMC meeting, so that, you know, if there were any interdepartmental conversations going on, then whoever was the lead could understand what they were and then be better poised to then put that forward in the IMC meeting, basically.
Yeah, definitely. As a minimum, there'll obviously be conversation between all the different council members in joint chats and Discord chats and things like that. But I would expect, especially if it's a large point of reference, I would expect for them to be having as many meetings as makes sense for them to be able to communicate that. And if that's a strat meeting soon before, then I would see no issue in that personally. But I guess it would be up to the individual members. And yeah, you're right. With the time zones and everything, it's obviously particularly difficult. But at the same time, for one of those strat meetings, I wouldn't think it'd be 100% necessary to have all 5 council members. If it needed to be organized quite quickly and things like that, I would expect that at least 3 council members would be around for that meeting pretty consistently, no matter what time it is. So I think that would be strong as well.
And this kind of rolls into the same question, and I don't want to keep rattling on because I would like to hear all your viewpoints. But if somebody is not available, i.e. the sub-council lead, and you're due to have a meeting of the IMC, could that person who is not available just pass that duty on to somebody on the sub-council? Like, maybe they're busy, they've had something happen, you know, they're up to date on the topic, they can put forward that information to the IMC on behalf of that person. It's going to be a rare case.
I don't think we've really discussed that. Do you guys want to what do you guys think?
Yeah, I can jump in here on that point, Corey.
Yep.
So So I in that situation, I would view it no different as any other sort of request for specialized information. So let's just give an example, Josh. Let's say that there's a marketing IAP that's gone through and it was routed to the marketing subcouncil, but there's really there's a core strategic element, right? Maybe there's there's a competitor that's emerging for Illuvium, and the approach that we're taking from a marketing standpoint, there's some potential existential risk to the project that the strategy subcouncil sees, right? And so the question of what we're doing is going to marketing, but there should be some major input coming from strategy. So two key things. One is that when that IAP is coming to the community subcouncil, all of the subcouncils should be able to see that. And so I would envision if I'm on the strategic subcouncil, we see this IAP coming up and we see the discussion coming from the community, we would begin discussing any key points that we would want to weigh in on that. Ideally, we could get some of that feedback over to the marketing subcouncil before it actually gets adjusted and voted on. But in the worst case, let's say that didn't happen for whatever reason. We couldn't align on our position, and it's going to the IMC. If the representative on the IMC from the strategy subcouncil is unavailable, I would expect that the IMC in that case would request a joining of the meeting by, let's call it a deputy from the strategy subcouncil, in the same way that we as a council today have requested visits from Danny, from our the Illuvium legal counsel, and any other expert that we might need at some point to make decisions. I would think that you would just send a proxy from the subcouncil to weigh in with that feedback. And then, of course, the final voting would be still done by the individual who's sitting on the IMC. But we should be attempting to work effectively as an organization in the same way that businesses and nonprofits and maybe to a lesser extent governments actually should be trying to work sort of cross specialized organizations.
Yeah, I also just wanted to add to that point. It's something that I'm pretty aware isn't visible, but a lot of council communication does happen through Discord channels, and it is just text-based. And so in that regard, meetings are very, very important to the process. They're a really good time to talk through contentious issues or nuanced issues, but if we're talking about just sharing of information, that can be accomplished incredibly effectively just through Discord text channels. So for this,
build on that super quickly, like you're saying, Victor, like a lot of what this group has been doing has been through text. And we've had weekly meetings since this group started, but what those meetings have been is more like either decision making, let's finally come to consensus. I want to ask a little bit more clarity around your perspective on it. And it really gets narrowed down to just a handful of issues that feel more contentious in the chat that need to have that live communication versus the asynchronous communication of typing. So it really isn't just meetings or where everything happens.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks, guys, for answering the question. I just think it would be like, as Annie mentioned, having the proxy. I think maybe having something written down, like in that circumstance, like a workflow at least, what it would look like would be nice. Therefore, there's a go-to process for if that kind of thing happens. So
that totally makes sense.
Yeah, the idea of a proxy is a really good one.
Cool, guys. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Joshith. Joshith.ith. I guess you changed it now. Very nice. Okay, we got a botch here. Did we lose 2 people? Did we just lose score? All right. Hey, Botch, how you doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Wonderful.
So just something that Josh brought up, I think I've been thinking about roles as something for the subcommittees. And I was wondering what you guys thought of this. So a chair, a co-chair, a secretary, and like a community lead for roles inside of a subcommittee. And so the chair is the person on the IMC. A co-chair could be someone that, if the person is not available for the IMC, could join that. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, I'll jump in because I know we already discussed this a little bit via DMs. I do see assigning roles as having some amount of value to it if we're talking about sort of some of the maybe more mundane aspects like taking council meeting notes and or potentially being responsible for say, well, I mean, in the case of the IMC rep, the chair in your example, responsible for the two-way communication between the IMC and the subcouncil. That sort of has value. Like we talked about, my main concern with having 5 roles is that it could be contentious figuring out who fills what role in the event that there's a sort of more undesirable role. And so I could see it causing issues structurally in that regard. But otherwise, I think it's a reasonable thing to think about at any rate.
Something that we've talked is kind of assigning roles, but having them be rotational in basis. And so just from a meeting management, Rich does an amazing job with this group. He's now going to have potentially 5 groups to do it for, which is not sustainable. And so having somebody that's like, okay, for the next meeting, you're responsible for the agenda and capturing topics. During the meeting, somebody's responsible for notes, somebody's responsible for timekeeping, but have those be rotational so everybody has to do every job as it goes through the epoch. But that's something that we want to build with kind of onboarding of what's the expectations, but also setting the new councils up with the tools to be able to be successful in that model.
You saying I can't handle 5 councils?
I would never want to take work off of you, but if you want to do that, go for it.
No, I'm just messing with you. Yeah, no, I think that rotational idea we talked about, it's not a bad one at all.
Yeah, and I would just add the kind of question that comes up then is, does it make more sense to explicitly create the structure in the framework of GovV2, or to essentially let each of the sub-councils and councils sort of figure out the best process for themselves. So I think kind of to the point I mentioned that each of the sub-councils I think will functionally be actually working very differently from a content, from an information and data gathering standpoint, and from even a voting and deliberation standpoint. I tend to favor giving them as much flexibility as we can. Obviously, you need a representative on the IMC still for voting purposes. But beyond that, I think favor letting the individuals that the community votes for and deems as the right fits to come in and work together to find their process. And I would just use this council as an example of what I think is a good organizational development approach, where we had 3 new council members, myself included, in this epoch, and everyone has kind of slotted into different roles that they have specific skill sets or aptitude or interest in. And so, again, as Blaker kind of mentioned, this isn't maybe fully visible to the community, but we've got individuals in the council that have stepped up and are taking the lead pretty consistently for gathering topics together and putting an agenda in place for each meeting. Others that are helping with the actual scheduling of meetings and time zone management and timing and so on. Others that are, well, really everyone's taken the lead at certain points for individual IAP, ICCP creation, documents and so on. So I think there's a lot of power if you have the right individuals and the right types of individuals working in a sub-council, in just letting them figure out what it is that they actually need to do, and not kind of oversteering too much from an IAP standpoint here.
All right. Botch?
I guess one of my concerns with that is just, I think this council is an anomaly in just how productive it is. And that I just, in my experience in the past with just organizing people, that when they have specific roles, they then excel in those roles. And I see secretary as a note taking as something that is going to be required. I think a community lead is probably something that would be, in my mind, beneficial for each sub council to have. And then I think the co-chair can also just fill that lead, that gap that could happen in the absence of the member that's supposed to be on the IMC. So that's just my statement on that.
Yep, that is a fair concern. I wouldn't inherently be opposed to sort of defining, like Daraji mentioned, perhaps like a rotational role for note taking. I'd also be pretty okay just assigning that role to the IMC lead. At a fundamental level, that individual is responsible for two-way communication between their sub-council and the IMC. And so you ideally want that person to be extremely organized and extremely clear on what their sub-council's position on different issues are. And note-taking is a very good way to make sure that you're accurately representing your sub-council's position on different topics. If you add that in with potentially a co-chair, which could just be the second most voted for person in the internal elections for the IMC representative, that could be a good solution that also factors in who people on that sub-council want to represent them. I don't think it needs to be extended past that, though. Like Annie said, there's a lot of responsibility that needs to be assigned to each sub-council to let their members find their roles in their areas of expertise, because it's sort of, I think the most advantage we can get out of each sub-council is having people fill the roles they're strongest in, and coupled with things like the vote of no confidence to remove people who aren't performing. I think that sort of the structure does put a bit more of an onus on each person to at least be acting in the areas they're strong in. And this could just be something that needs to be looked at once the structure's in place, right? This stuff all is evolving. It all will need revision over time. It'll need iteration depending on what's effective. So,
All right, thanks, guys.
Cool. Thanks, Botch. Anybody else with any questions? Feel free to raise your hand. I'll bring you guys up. I don't think we have any more in the type chat currently. Maybe Ricky Tan asking something now. No questions. Like I guess I'll just say one of the things is like Blichter just mentioned, this thing is probably going to go through a lot of changes and iterations in the future. Like, you have to think we're doing I like to think like I've seen a lot of DAOs and a lot of different structures over different projects, and honestly, this governance V2 that we've kind of created, and even in its current state, is a lot more inclusive and set up and clear than almost any other DAO I've seen out there. So it's really encouraging to see that we're already at this point. And I guess one of the things that I reiterated when I was starting to ideate this document with others was, like, it doesn't have to be perfect when we start it. Like, the main point is improving upon what we already had, which was just the single council. So improving upon that, and then moving from there and improving more. Like, we can always change stuff in the future. That's the great thing about us being a DAO, is if there's something we realize isn't working for whatever reason, we can always change it with an IIP in the future. And it's not like a major process to do that, like, it's all for the collective goal of making Illuvium as great as it can be, and making sure the DAO is sustained and all of that. So yeah. Any other questions before we go ahead and close it off with the council members? It looks like everyone's pretty much good. Want to give a shout out to my boy Alex in the crowd over there with the chicken PFP. He requested up for a second.
So maybe I've got a question. I won't put anyone on the spot, but if if there is any other feedback, and Rich, I think your feedback was well taken. But if there are any of the core contributors or team members that are here in the audience, if you want to come up on stage and just give your feedback or observations on the governance process, maybe historically, and or your take on this new version, I'd certainly be open to that. I know we've talked to a number of the team members over the past couple of months here to get feedback along the way. But if you have anything you want to share, I would certainly be open to that feedback as well here.
Don't feel pressured though either.
Yeah, that's why I said I'm not going to name any names or anything. Just if anyone did want to hop up, that would be great. If not, no worries.
Yeah.
And so I think just to maybe reiterate on Rich's point, there's a long road ahead of us, and as Victor has I think mentioned a few times and put very well, we would like to be the leading DAO, but frankly we're probably only going to get 40% of the way to maybe perfection in the best way that we could have the governance structure set up, right? But if that's still 4x or 5x better than where we're at today, it's a really good step forward. And so a lot of the elements, and even like the topics that Botch mentioned, what we could do is we can always wait and see how things evolve in the first epoch, especially after GovV2 is live, and recognize that we'll want to do a GovV 2.1 during that epoch for afterwards, right? And some of the learning is going to steer us in different directions than we think is essential today. So just being open to that, and obviously everyone here is in a very dynamic industry, being in Web3. I think that's one of our core strengths as a group. It'll give us the ability to iterate very quickly and continue to stay much more agile than any of our competitors, as long as we can keep that approach.
Awesome.
Yeah. In that vein, since it doesn't look like there are any more questions or comments, I just wanted to reiterate that getting feedback from both the community and the team, if they want to contribute feedback to the structure, that's incredibly important going forward. It really only does take one person to notice a flaw in the proposal or something that could be improved. And I realize that GovV2 is an intimidatingly large document. I have been noticing that explicitly as we've been revising it. It can be a little bit painful to go through. But this truly is the crux of making sure that this proposal is robust, is getting community members reading it and giving their thoughts on it. So I strongly encourage anyone who has time and the will to do so to read through and give your feedback on it. It's crucially important. So I would like to thank everybody for coming out. I know this is for some people maybe a dry topic. Yeah, I appreciate everybody's time and attention.
Yeah, if that's where we're gonna wrap it up, I'll let Taraji say his farewells as well. But I'll just say, I also want to give a shout out to Jeremy. Jeremy is our IT operations guy, and he's the one who helped set up Collabland to make sure that we could get governance more sorted out, and we have these nice new governance forums. So just make sure you guys all give Jeremy a proper thank you for everything that he's set up for governance as well. He does a great job beyond all that he does. Taraji, you got anything to say? Last words?
Okay, super quick, and again say, I continue to be very impressed with the community, how engaged folks are in what Victor said is the drier topics of governance, and just how many people hung out today to listen to the four of us chat on this. Very impressed. Keep it coming, and it really is hopefully driven by the community. It's not us writing this, it's us hearing the feedback and doing what we can to integrate that. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and one of the main things I guess I would say, we're trying to get everyone that cares more involved with governance. So I know when I was in Australia explaining to people what Illuvium was, like one of the key points that I try to explain to people is how much, say you really do have, and I guess that's part of our job, part of all of your jobs as part of the community, to encourage people to come and get involved in these discussions and involved in the IIPs and reading them and giving feedback. So if there's one thing I could say that everyone in the community could do is push those efforts. I'm sure a lot of us do, but with governance structures, it's like they said, a little bit more of the dry topics, but it's fundamentally the most important thing of what Web3 is and what crypto is, and these projects that are, especially Illuvium, making these games for the players, and it's for you guys. So I would say like spreading the word is key on these type of things as well.
And the other thing to remember is once we get this implemented, we do want to get it out there as soon as possible. We're going to need 20 folks that are willing to step up and do this. And so there's going to be a lot more opportunity to be up on the stage and in these meetings to really drive it behind the scenes as well. So definitely folks that are involved now, continue doing that and think about which of these sub-councils would be the best fit for you and be able to run, because the folks that are hanging out, you're the ones that we want to be leading this in the future.
Okay, with that said, if nobody else has anything else to say, Annie, Daraji, Victor, all good?
All good on my end. Thank you, sir.
All right, guys, we will be posting this. It's all recorded. It will be on the Illuvium Plus YouTube channel. It's the supplemental YouTube channel to the official YouTube. So this will all be posted up there for you guys to review later. But other than that, thank you for joining us. Have a good one, everybody.